Hello everyone and welcome to this week's video, and today we're going to be talking about painting trees with an emphasis on sky holes. So we've been talking a lot about edges and how important they are in painting, and today we're going to just kind of change gears a little bit. We're going to still talk about edges because they're important for sky holes, but we're going to have some emphasis on sky holes, and I'm going to do a tree painting and kind of show you some do's and don'ts when it comes to painting sky holes. So I'm going to start off by reading a quote from John Carlson, and if you're not familiar with his book, John Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting, this is one that you should have in your library, and I'm going to put a link to it in the description. So if you don't have this one, this is the one to have. Carlson says, "When you paint those decorative holes which either make or break a tree, it is well to note the colonization of the tracery masses so that your holes may function and not just be mere spots." Now I want to translate that to you because his language is kind of stilted, but what he actually means is we need to pay attention to the way the tree grows, where the branches go, where the twigs go, where the masses of the foliage are, because you will put the sky holes where they are in relation to the branches and the twigs, and not just randomly. So just like when we paint wildflowers, you don't want to just have a big tree shape and go and put dots. Same with the field. But a lot of times what ends up happening is when we're doing a tree and it's time to put some sky holes, we treat it as an afterthought, like, oh shoot, I need some sky holes, dot, 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 dot. And they don't make sense. So here's some things that you want to avoid when painting sky holes. Number one, you want to check their shape and their size and their location. They are usually located along the edges of where the branches are. They're also located oftentimes on the edges of the trees where the foliage becomes more sparse. But they always have a relationship to the structure of the tree. So with that means they're not always just circles or dots, and they're not always linear marks or squiggles. And so we have to pay attention to the shape and the size. A lot of times what we end up doing is making all our sky holes the same shape and the same size, and then they tend to look like decorative ornaments and not part of the tree or behind the tree, which is what they are. Another thing that we do with sky holes that we need to avoid is we make them the wrong color. If we make the sky holes too light, then they're going to look like ornaments on the tree. So you have to think about the fact that sky holes are openings in the tree, so the sky is coming from behind, but the foliage makes it darker, and so they're actually going to be darker. So they're darker than the surroundings, and I'm going to show you when I do my demonstration. But don't make them too light. They'll look like ornaments. Pay attention to the color. Where is that sky hole or opening? Is it behind the sky, or is maybe another tree back there, or maybe a mountain? So you don't want to just automatically say, sky hole, I'm going to make it a blue sky color. It could be a mountain, it could be a tree. So pay attention to what is actually behind the tree. And then one last thing, watch the edges. And here is where we're going to put these two ideas together. If your sky holes are all hard edge shaped, like a hard dot or a hard circle, that doesn't feel natural. It looks like you pasted that shape on. And I'm going to show you a little trick on how you can make a sky hole that looks a little bit more natural by paying attention to the edges. Alright, so another one big thing, and we'll get on to the demo. For sky holes, you want to slow down. You want to squint. When you squint, those light areas will jump out at you and you can see where they're placed, and you want to search for those, and you want to take your time. If you just go and you randomly place dots, chances are your sky holes are not going to look natural and believable. Alright, so let's get started with a quick demo of a tree. And I'm not so sure exactly how far I'm going to take this demo. We'll see. I usually like to keep these videos under 20 minutes. So we'll see how far I get with the demo. And but the main reason for this demo is to show you the sky hole So here's my reference photo. It's a drive-by photo. You can see the car mirror here. And so we didn't stop. And so I just took some pictures of the beautiful foliage. So I'm really liking this tree and a little bit of this orange tree right in here. And I like the way it plays so nicely with the evergreens behind it. But so it's mostly going to be about this red tree. So I've already taken the liberty of using a pencil and drawing in some of the main foliage masses. So I look and I see where are the big pads of foliage. I could actually take my pencil, if I had it in my reference photo, and draw around those big main shapes of foliage. And I just replicated those here in the drawing. I also put in some of the tree trunks because remember we want to know, have a general idea of the structure of the tree because that's going to help us with our sky holes. And you can see this is a fairly open tree. It's not a big, dense, heavily, with a lot of heavy foliage. It's pretty airy, so that gives us a challenge in itself. So the first thing I'm going to do when I'm painting a red tree is I'm not going to do an underpainting for this painting because I really just want to get in and show you the sky holes. But typically I might do an underpainting, but sometimes we just need to jump right in with the pastel. So I'm going to take a darker red, my darkest red, which is a brick red, and I'm using my Terry Ludwig floral landscape set. I'm going to go ahead and put it in on this orange tree too. The paper that I'm using is gray Ming Art sanded paper that I got at the IAPS convention. It's a sanded paper. It's a really interesting surface. I think you can get it on Amazon. And one of these days I'll do a more thorough review of it. I've added another even darker red, a burgundy red in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm looking at the main shape. I'm probably going to put in more color in the tree than is really present in the tree itself. But I'm going to then be able to use the background or the sky color to carve into that tree shape. I'm gonna make this tree. Oh, I can always add the orange. Now, you can see that I started from the dark. I'm getting a little bit lighter. I'm not going to go to pink because if you remember, that's going to make it feel washed out. I have another orangey red that I'm going to use next. But before I do that, I want to establish some of the trunks. So I'm going to just use they're white trunks. So instead of using white, I'm using just a gray hard pastel. And I'm going in and I'm putting in where in the reference photo I see some of those main trunks. One thing that I'm careful of, and this is true even if these tree trunks were the same spacing in the photo, because sometimes it happens in nature that things get lined up, but most often it's not. And so I'm going to be very mindful of making my tree trunks not be in a row like soldiers. I'm adding now a little bit of a darker blue violet in the tree, and because I have it in my hand, I'm going to just put it down there to ground the tree shape, make it a little bit darker. I'm using the violet. The purple plays really nicely with the red. Alright, and now I'm going to establish some of the darker green evergreen shapes. Now, I'm going to do a video or a demo on evergreens later on in the month, but just to give you a heads up, I'm making a line and I'm just simply taking my pastel and going back and forth to give that evergreen feeling, and I'm mindful of not making it look like a perfect Christmas tree shape, because in real life it wouldn't be so perfect. And there's some of these evergreens are behind the red tree, so I'm going to put that in. as well. And there's some green down here in the foreground. This actually is turning out to be a really good candidate for probably some sort of wash if I wanted to, you know, just establish the trees and then come back and create a wash and then go back and do it some more. And I might do that, but I really just want to show you the sky holes for this video. Alright, so we have enough established. Let's go ahead and add that red-orange to our red tree. So notice what I've done to get this red tree to really glow. I started with a darker, cooler red, which is that brick red, that burgundy. I got a little bit lighter, a little bit more of a traditional pure red, and now I'm coming in with a red-orange. Now if I really wanted to step it up and get it to glow, I can actually even take it as far as adding orange. I'm adding some down in this area here. It's not really about this. Alright, so now we have our big tree shape in place. It's time to start adding those important sky holes. So in Sky Hole 101, you want to establish the big mass of your tree, get the general pads of foliage, and then you're going to come back with your sky color and carve into the tree. And because I want you to be able to see these, I'm going to just use a pale blue for my sky color. So let's go ahead and put in some sky right now. I'm not going to worry about those evergreens just yet. What happens with the sky? It tends to get lighter as we go down to the horizon. So I'll just do that. Because we have to pay attention to what's behind the tree. So I'm taking these colors and I'm going right up to the tree. Alright, now it's time to carve and make those sky holes. But if you remember, we don't want to use the lightest color. So in other words, this would be what not to do. Taking the lightest blue and making a few marks. What happens to those? They're hard-edged, sharp, light shapes, and they just tend to pop out, and they don't look like they're part of the tree. So let's get rid of those guys. And I'll go back with my red. And let's see if we can't do a better job with those sky holes. So I'm going to take the darker color blue, the color that I first used, and occasionally I'll go even darker than this. I could take this one value darker, and I don't really have it in a softer pastel, but here it is in a harder pastel. It's a little bit darker than the sky color that's right next to it. And I'm going to use this to carve in, and I'm going to pay attention to where the branches are. So I know there was a branch in here, so I'm going to add a little sky hole right in here. I know there was a branch right in here. And if you don't remember where your branches are, you can look at your photo to give you an idea. And if you squint, you'll be able to see where all those sky holes are just popping out against the foliage. Now when I come down to where it's light, I'm going to use the darker sky color. Not the dark pastel, but the actual darker sky color. Not the light. Because remember what happens when you use the light? It's too light inside the tree, and then it stands out. Now, what I'm doing now is I'm going through the whole tree and I'm doing some carving. Going along the edges of the branches and the trunk shapes. And it looks a little bit silly because they're not really, they're standing out, right? They're still standing out even though they're a darker color. Why are they standing out? Because they are too hard edged. So I have a couple of things that I need to do to fix them. And this brings up the point that very rarely are you going to get your sky holes right the very first pass. So I go and do this, and now I'm going to have to revise this. And a lot of times we're under the impression that once you put in those sky holes, they should be right and you should be able to move on. But that's not the case. You've got to put some in and then take some out. Add some more foliage, add some more sky holes, and it's a back and forth until you get it right. So I want to give you a quick little trick to show you how you can soften the edge. of a sky hole to make it feel more natural. And this is a trick that I learned from Richard McKinley, and he simply takes one side of that sky hole and takes a finger and lightly, let's do it again. See if you can get close up. I'm only going to flick my finger on one edge just to soften it. So we can have one hard edge and one soft edge, and that is much more believable. Let's go and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and tap all my sky holes on one side. Soften them. The other thing that I need to do is come back with more foliage and carry some more foliage on top of some of those sky holes, and that also makes it feel more natural. So you can see now where I put some in, I'm starting to disguise them just a little bit so that they're not just big light shapes in the tree. And again, a lot of times it's a give and take. The other thing that I often like to do is take my tree when I get to the end and give it a quick spray of workable fixative. Which, by the way, I tried to order some today and it's back ordered everywhere. So I don't know what the run is on my Blair workable fixative, but it's on back order. So I'm going to experiment to see if I can't find an alternative. And of course I'll keep you posted. Now, on top of the fixative, you see how I get this really nice feeling of texture? That helps give a feeling of suggested foliage. Now I'm going to come back and I'm going to add a few more sky holes. So just poke a few in, especially along the edges. Soften the edges a little bit. Again, the fact that we are dealing with edges is was by design, because it's so important in painting a tree. I'm going to go ahead and re-establish some of these tree trunks in here. I'm going to use this pale blue that I happen to have in my hand just because it works really well. I'm not really trying to paint this tree for you as a complete painting. I'm really more interested in getting the sky holes in for you. And the last thing that I typically will do with a tree is once I get the main sky holes in, I'll come in and I'll put in a few hard edge leaf shapes. So I'm taking my bright kind of orangey red and coming in and pressing hard to create a few leaf shapes, and it depends on the type of tree as to what shapes I paint. So if it was a palm tree, I wouldn't be making spots. I'd be making more of a linear mark. So I'll just, right along the edges, I'll just put a few leaf shapes, and the idea is when the eye sees these hard edge shapes, we can then deduce that all of this is foliage. So that's really all I'm going to do for this. I really wanted to show you how I manage sky holes by putting some in, taking some out, softening them, making sure they are in the right place in the tree and that they're not random. So you slow down, you can squint, and you really be sensitive to where those areas are in the tree, and you're going to have more effective sky holes that way. So I'll probably work on this painting some more, and I'll post a few progress photos so that you can see how I develop it further. But mainly I wanted you to get this idea of sky holes for today's lesson. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and let's paint.